This is another video that came from our viewers. Someone suggested that we do a video about the Bridge album, and what the viewer meant by that was the album that really moved an artist from where they were to changing everything for them. So coming up today on the channel, I'm going to talk about 5 albums that changed everything for an artist. Coming right up. Hey, it's Russ from the Infectious Group podcast and right here on YouTube. And we always say, hey, viewers, please, if there's something you want to see us cover, by all means, leave a comment. We did have a viewer say, hey, why don't you talk about Bridge albums or albums that became the thing that took an artist from, maybe relative obscurity into the big time. So I've got 5 that I think some of these are going to be obvious, but I think some of these are not so obvious and maybe more subtle that I'd love to get comments on in the comment section below. The first one out of the gate, I think, is one that's kind of uncommon that people might not think of, and that's Raising Hell by Run DMC. Now, you have an artist here who was huge at the forefront of their region in New York City, the Upper East Coast. Run DMC, if you would have spoken to anybody in 1978 to 1982, would have told you, these guys are legends. If you would have spoke to somebody around the rest of the country, they may not have even heard of the genre of rap yet. And Raising Hell just launched Run DMC and the genre into really mainstream view. And on top of that, so you have Run DMC original tracks on there that are amazing. The title track, Hit It Run, It's Tricky, You Be Illin'. But then you have a track like Walk This Way featuring Aerosmith, which I would argue not only, obviously that had something to do with the stratospheric rise of that record and Run DMC, but that also created an entire new genre in one track. I would argue you don't get bands like Faith No More, Rage Against the Machine, up to including like POD, Limp Bizkit, like later in the late 90s. I don't think you get any of those acts without Run DMC kicking things off. So Raising Hell by Run DMC is my first pick. The second one here is kind of an obvious one, but Nevermind by Nirvana. Yeah, they had Bleach before that. And yes, alternative music, even though, Rolling Stone magazine and the mainstream media wouldn't have you believe this, but alternative music was very much a rising force before Nevermind came out. But nobody had really become a big, huge sensation. There was even separate charts in Billboard for what was considered alternative music, but they called it college rock. And then, the guitar riff and the drum kick heard around the world on Smells Like Teen Spirit really ushered in. And again, this is a bridge not just for the artist, but for an entire genre. Now, the current music of the time, what's disrespectfully called hair metal, was not broomed out as fast as everybody says that it was, but Nevermind helped usher Nirvana to the absolute heights of fame and brought along with it the Pumpkins, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, all of those bands, Chains, all came along with that. The third one on my list is one that I think most people would feel kind of is cheating, and that's Thriller by Michael Jackson, because sure, Michael Jackson was super famous since he was 9 years old. But I would argue that the success that Michael had with the Jackson 5, the Jacksons, and even his own solo success up to including Off the Wall, which Off the Wall was successful at the time, but nowhere near the massive commercial success of Thriller. Thriller was a game changer, again, like the first 2 records on this list, that not only changed the course of the artist's career and brought Michael Jackson to a height that nobody had seen before as far as overall popularity in the mainstream, it also was partially responsible for saving the music industry as a whole. It had a huge cultural impact on things like MTV and the way business was done there. Every man, woman, and child was walking around in a red leather jacket and white glove, regardless of color. So to say that record changed the course of Michael Jackson's career is an understatement. And to say that it changed the course of pop culture as a whole is a wild understatement. Next one is one that's probably going to be the most obvious on my list, and that's the Dark Side of the Moon. But I have some points that I think most people don't think about. The Dark Side of the Moon, sure, it's enormous. If you're watching this video in this week, you've probably seen a ton of hype about the fact that it's the 50-year anniversary of the Dark Side of the Moon. And yes, it was on the Billboard charts for over 700 weeks and so on and so forth. What most people don't think about, though, is that the Dark Side of the Moon was Pink Floyd's 7th record. So here now today, if you think about the culture we're in now, if an artist doesn't absolutely blow up in that first or second record, they're done. And Pink Floyd had the ability over the first 6 studio albums to hone their craft and become the band good enough to make the Dark Side of the Moon. And I think that's a huge part of the story that a lot of people don't think about. So after that, you then get these amazing masterpieces that all go off in way different directions from the Dark Side of the Moon. But because they were able to learn how to be a band that could create such masterpieces prior. The last one I'm going to round it out with might be my most unorthodox pick out of the group, but stay with me on this. I would argue that The Chronic by Dr. Dre is a huge album for a huge bridge album or a transition record. Dr. Dre, of course, like Michael Jackson, had success prior to this record. NWA was a huge force. Dr. Dre was part of that group, of course, and he was known, but really NWA was known more for the messaging that they had and the way that they were pushing rap into new areas of not only production, but the country. New people were hearing rap in a different way than they had ever heard before, and NWA was telling stories that no one had ever heard before. However, when Dre went on his own, again, just like I've said about some other artists on here, not only did he do what he was doing before, but he did it in a new, refreshed, better way, I would argue, than what was done before. A lot of the same messaging, but also a lot of different messaging of things that he had to say that maybe didn't have space on NWA records. And to say that this changed the course of pop culture would also be an understatement, that it didn't, rather. It's helped usher in rap acts from all over the country that no one had heard of, that were regional and whatnot, and brought us artists like Snoop Dogg and a lot of the West Coast crew that people hadn't even known of that were maybe adjacent to NWA. So The Chronic comes in at number 5 for me as a record that absolutely changed the trajectory of the artist. Those were 5 albums that I picked that I thought were huge. It had huge impacts on the artists, and most of these, I would argue, had a huge impact on pop culture. Thank you so much to the viewer of the channel that gave us the idea for this video. We love it when you do that. Please drop some comments below if you disagree with my picks for any reason. But if you also have any picks of your own that you say, oh, the artist's career was totally different after this. And as we always say in these videos, thank you so much for watching.